Really good to see you. Good morning. If you're new here, my name's Joel. I'm one of the leaders in the church, and we have teaching from the Bible every week. If you have your Bible with you, you might want to turn with me to the end of Nehemiah chapter 6, and we will read from verse 15 to chapter 7 and verse 4. So the wall was finished on the 25th day of the month of Elul in 52 days. And when all our enemies heard of it, all the nations around us were afraid and fell greatly in their own esteem, for they perceived that this work had been accomplished with the help of our God. Moreover, in those days the nobles of Judah sent many letters to Tobiah, and Tobiah's letters came to them. For many in Judah were bound by oath to him, because he was the son-in-law of Shechaniah, the son of Arah, and his son, Jehohanan, had taken the daughter of Meshullam, the son of Berechiah, as his wife. Also, they spoke of his good deeds in my presence and reported my words to him. And Tobiah sent letters to make me afraid. Now, when the wall had been built, and I had set up the doors and the gatekeepers, the singers and the Levites, you know you need singers when you're doing construction, it's very important. That's why builders have always got Radio 2 going on in the background. It's even back in ancient times, same thing. The Levites had been appointed. I gave my brother Hanani and Hananiah, the governor of the castle, charge over Jerusalem. For he was a more faithful and God-fearing man than many. And I said to them, let not the gates of Jerusalem be opened until the sun is hot. And while they were standing guard, let them shut and bar the doors. Appoint guards from among the inhabitants of Jerusalem, some at their guard posts and some in front of their own homes. The city was wide and large, but the people within it were few, and no houses had been rebuilt. Okay, well, let me start by talking about finishing the job. Finishing is something we approve of. We like it when people finish the job they came to do. We like it when we've got guys building in the house, guys doing stuff on our car, and we like it when it's finished. We like it when they've done a good job. That's a huge virtue to have. It's not an easy one, though. It's not something we necessarily enjoy. Some of you have done things like the bell bin analysis, where in your workplace you are evaluated as to what your strengths and weaknesses are, and then they say, well, on the bell bin scale, you are a monitor evaluator, or you're a shaper, or you're a plant, or you're a team worker. And there are these variety of different qualities that people bring to the table within a team. One of them is the completer finisher. And the completer finisher is the person who excels at getting tasks finished. And generally, they're the kind of person that doesn't feel very comfortable until something is finished. They thrive on that. Now, I'm not necessarily a completer finisher. I expect that probably the minority of us in this room would kind of peak on the graph in that place. But I think what I tend to do, or some of us, I'm sure, tend to do, is because we don't sort of peak on the graph as completer finishers, we think, well, I'll leave the finishing to the completer finishers. We're attracted to new ideas, new tasks, things that draw on our creative energy, and we want to move on. We want to move on. We've done with that. I started that, I'm bored with it, I'm moving on. Now, I'm not here to say that that's wrong necessarily. I think in reality, we need people who are good at moving on. We need people who are thinking initiative and enterprise and creativity. All the time we need to be moving on to the right things to be doing. And there is a danger, I think, amongst those who are natural completer finishers. There is a danger that they will spend a lot of their time completing and finishing things that don't really need completing or finishing. They'll spend a lot of time doing stuff that doesn't deserve to get done. It's more out of an instinct, maybe even a slight insecurity that I've really got to finish this. And I sometimes liken it to some cattle who might, in olden times with agriculture, you get oxen carrying the yoke and dragging it along so that the plow or whatever, the plow is getting through the field. The reality is that cattle need to be directed. If you don't turn them around and make them do the field the way back, they'll just carry on indefinitely, doing someone else's field or something, someone's rose bush. It's got to be directed. There's got to be an application of wisdom. Okay, you're a completer finisher. But do you know what? Maybe the thing you're completing and finishing isn't quite the thing you need to do right now. So can we turn around and move on to this task? And there's a necessity for moving on. But hear what I'm saying. We can also fall off the horse on the other side as well. You hear the point? You can steer over so far in the wrong direction the other way. You're kind of never getting anything done. Your house is filled with projects that were begun but not completed. And our inboxes are filled with things that we've been asked to do and we said we would do but we haven't done. It's ultimately going to mean that we are failing to remain productive. We don't really achieve those things we long to achieve. And Nehemiah is an example of someone who achieves, who follows through and completes the task. And in that respect, he has tremendous amount to teach us. So I want us to draw out a couple of key things that we can see, that we can learn from this, and apply them to all of our life. I mean, reality, this affects everything that we do. What are the things that we're called to complete? Well, most of us are not constructing walls in the Middle East, but we do have things that we need to carry through, follow through on well. Even things like marriages and family life. I mean, reality, we live in a culture that celebrates weddings more than it celebrates marriages. We love to see something begun. We take photographs and fill celebrity magazines with the wedding. There aren't that many photos in Hello magazine of Mr. and Mrs. Smith who've spent 47 years married, living in a suburb in Brighton and have just remained faithful, finished well. But according to this book, I think they probably deserve more snaps in the magazine than the guys who kicked off with a 10 grand wedding and looked spectacular for the cameras. The Bible tells us which things to value, which things to aspire to, and they are faithfulness, perseverance, committing and staying committed to covenant promises. It's not a quality we excel at. It's not what we're famous for in Brighton in the 21st century, but it's what God longs to put within you and me. So let's keep learning from this man. I want to pull out two main things today. The first of them is that he made good choices about people. It's one of the key parts of how he succeeded. He made good choices about people. The second one, which we'll touch on before we finish, is that he kept his mind on God's plan. And we'll talk about what that means in a moment. But first of all, he made good decisions about people, which is a difficult thing to do. Repeatedly, as we've seen in the last few weeks, he's got people who are criticizing, lobbing all kinds of emotional grenades into the problems and the construction work that Nehemiah's doing. He's got rumors spreading. He's even got threats. He's got death threats against him. The guy has got problems with people of all shapes and sizes. In this part of the story, it recounts the problem he had with Tobiah and Tobiah's family. It's an interesting situation. I'll just read it again, verse 17. In those days, the nobles of Judah sent many letters to Tobiah, and Tobiah's letters came to them. For many in Judah were bound by oath to him because he was the son-in-law of Shechaniah, the son of Arah. This, in one respect, is no different than usual. Tobiah has been an opponent of the work from the beginning. Okay? Tobiah is a fairly significant potentate in the area. He's got power, he's got influence, and he does not like Nehemiah. He does not want Nehemiah to succeed. He continually attacks him. But in this case, we see the subtlety. We see just how difficult the problem became. Because it's not just that he's got an opponent out there, he's got an opponent, in fact, he's got quite a few opponents in here, inside the wall. People who are actually kind of on Tobiah's side. And it makes for a difficult situation for this leader. He's got to decide, am I going to listen to these Tobiah fans who are in my camp, or am I going to have to be ruthless and say, no, I simply don't receive this man's influence when it comes to what I'm trying to construct here. The truth is there are times when we simply do have to be, well, maybe ruthless is the word. There are times when we need to say, okay, the thing that comes first in my life is Jesus and his purpose for my life. And even if that means having to cut myself free from the influence and power and control of people who are actually very close to me. This is a huge thing. I mean, it's come up before. I know I've been saying this kind of thing a little bit over the last few weeks already. It's kind of in the story of Nehemiah, but it's not just in the story of Nehemiah. It's all over the Bible, really. You get the story of David and Jonathan. David was the great king that God was raising up. God had decided to raise up David to be his trusted king for Israel. But the existing king, Saul, has turned against David, wants to attack him, wants to take him down, even wants him dead. Saul's son, Jonathan, who would be the heir apparent, he would be the Prince of Wales, if you like, has made friends with David, sees that God is with David, and even gives his allegiance to David in an incredible act of sacrifice. And so he kind of is stuck in between Saul and David. And he's at one stage trying to keep both of them happy. It comes to the point where Jonathan sees just how deep the hatred for David goes in his father. And he finally says, that's it. I cut myself off. He becomes, as it were, committed to David. It's over against his father. Doesn't stop being an honoring son. Still respects his dad as a dad. But he knows ultimately, I must follow the one that God is raising up. It can be like that in family life even now. People become Christians, and in whatever circumstance, whether it's parenting or other kinds of relationships that we have, people who have tremendous influence over us, we feel torn because we know, I want to follow Jesus, but I know that I need to honor this person as well. And we perhaps get confused because we begin to confuse honoring this person ultimately with fearing this person. You know the difference I'm talking about. Sometimes what we want to say is righteous respect for a person. Deep down what we're doing is we're fearing them. We are letting them control us. We're almost treating them as more important than God. And we can't do that. Jesus himself said to the disciples, don't you guys think that I've come to bring peace in the earth? He said, I have come to bring a sword. He said, I have come to turn a son against his mother and father, and parents against their children. What does he mean by that? Does Jesus hate families? Does Jesus want to tear families apart? Far from it. Jesus loves families. He loves marriages. He loves parenting. He loves all the things that you guys want to give yourselves to wholeheartedly. Jesus is for those things, but those things on the right foundation. What we sometimes do is we put family, children, husband, wife, boyfriend, girlfriend, colleague, peer before God. And then we wonder why our life has gone haywire. We think, yeah, but if I pull away from them, that's terrible. That will destroy my life. That will mess things up. You're completely wrong. What you'll be doing is setting your life on the right foundation. You will be loving that person appropriately. I love my wife better because I love God first. If I love my wife first, I will love her wrong, in the wrong way. In fact, I will love her less than I should. But because I put God first, I'm learning, 14 years into marriage, I'm learning to love her better because she's not first in my life. Jesus is. Do you see this principle? We put Jesus first, even in our relationships, and we learn to love people and serve people and prioritize better, not worse. We do things better. Some of you, it is very practical. There's someone, or maybe some few in your life, who have inordinate influence over you, the wrong kind of influence. And you may find this, if you find this a nice teaching, you've got me wrong, all right? If what I'm saying to you is making you think, yes, I get to put it in the neck for my dad because the preacher said so, you've not heard me. You've not heard me. All right? I'm not telling you something easy. I'm telling you something that should cause you pain because you should honor your parents or your friends, or you should love. You look for ways to honor people, but not inordinately, not over against your honoring and fearing of God. Even Jesus himself, do you know the story? You find it in Mark's gospel. His mother and his brothers, his father had died by now, his earthly father, came to find him while he was teaching and preaching. They couldn't understand him. All this nonsense about him being the king and the new kingdom that God was bringing in, and all this people getting carried away. He's the Messiah. What are you doing, Jesus? What's going on? His mother should have known better. She knew, really, because she was the one there when the angels and the shepherds and all the rest. But she gradually lost a sense of his purpose and greatness and his role, and she wanted to control him a little bit. Jesus had to say in front of people, it was very humbling for her. He said, "These are my mother and brothers," talking to the people that God was giving him as a new family, a spiritual family. And Jesus loved his mum. He was a good son. He loved his brothers. He was a great brother. Still is. But you must put God first. You must put God's calling on your life first. You must understand where these things fit. This is something that works in all kinds of practical ways for us. And sometimes it does mean we make decisions that cost us, that hurt us. I remember watching the movie Master and Commander, which is one of my favorite films. It's a beautiful film, which is about sailors during the Napoleonic Wars. And there's a point in it which, if you haven't seen it, I wouldn't do it justice in my description, but I'll try and tell you roughly what's going on. They're in the kind of South Seas, somewhere off the coast of South America, I guess. Huge storm in the middle of the night, terrifying. Looks like the ship could go under. Hundreds of men on board. Someone is up in the rigging, trying to sort things out, trying to fix the ship, along with many others. But the rigging breaks, and one of the masts falls, and he goes overboard with it. And this mast is being held to the ship by the rigging, by the ropes. And this one sailor who's gone overboard, the only thing that's holding him to life is the rigging. I mean, he's many yards out into the ocean now. He's only got the rigging and this bit of mast that's fallen to keep him alive. And eventually, he grabs the rigging, and people are celebrating. This is good, he might survive. But then they start to realize that because the ship is being held by the rigging, there's no choice. They're going to have to cut this guy. They're going to have to cut the rigging, otherwise the ship could go under. So eventually Russell Crowe makes this decision where they start to hack away at the rigging, and it goes out to sea. And this sailor drowns. While he's going down, you see the masts come back up square. Because the thing that was tugging them down and threatening the safety of the ship, has been cut off, and they're free. And there's this roar from the whole boat, people under the deck celebrating and cheering. Wow, we're free! It's incredible. It's quite a scene. But then you look at the face of the captain and you realize that he knows what only a few people know. At that point, he's not thinking just of the freedom from certain death. He's thinking of the one man who has died. And the reality is, sometimes to go forward in your life, in your obedience to God, sometimes the only way you can do it is sometimes cut yourself. Set yourself free from things that are controlling you. Now, sometimes that will even be personal things, personal relational things. I don't mean you have to be rude, harsh, turn on people, and get religious on them, self-righteous on them, treat them as sinful people. No, absolutely not. But to move forward in God, you may need to say, God, you must come first, even over this relationship and this relationship. There are many things. All I'm saying in this sermon is the big principle. For some of you, you're thinking, what does that mean for me? What does that mean for my situation? What does that mean for this relationship? Well, you may have to talk this through in small group and get wisdom and think about the practical implications. But I'm trying to help you with the big picture here. Nehemiah was strong. He had people coming to him saying, yeah, but he's in our family. Look, you don't understand. It's family ties here, Nehemiah. Nehemiah was able to say, I know, but we've got to build the wall. We've got to stay focused on God's call. We've got to trust God in situations where we think sometimes the thing that stops us obeying God is because we're trying to play God. We're trying to be the one that will bring help and safety to someone's life. I remember being in a situation where I knew I had to finish a relationship. I wouldn't do it for weeks. I knew that God had told me to do it. I wouldn't do it for weeks. And you know why? I thought, what will happen to this person? And eventually I realized God was saying to me, do you think I care less about this person than you do? Do you think you're God? Do you think you're the one that's got to save that person? Oh, thank God. Set me free. I trust you, God. You will look after this person. It's a painful one, but it's part of our story. It's part of what it means to get things finished for God. So he makes a good decision there about how Tobiah's influence is going to be received within the walls. He also makes a decision about, a positive decision, about putting leaders in place. You look at chapter 7, verse 2. I gave my brother Hananiah and Hananiah, the governor of the castle, charge over Jerusalem. For he was a more faithful and God-fearing man than many. So there's two guys here, both got very similar sounding names, Hananiah, Hananiah. One of them is his brother, one of them is the governor of the castle, or the leader of the castle. This is fascinating because it helps us to understand positively. Okay, we've heard about Tobiah, who was a bad influence. Now we're hearing about two men who were a great influence, truly great. How did Nehemiah deal with them? Well, he appointed them to more authority. He said, okay, I want you to take responsibility for this city. But this is instructive because it helps us to see what are the criteria, what are the qualifications that Nehemiah uses when he evaluates trustworthy men and women. You can see a very simple description there in verse 2. He was a more faithful and God-fearing man than many. There's two qualities. There's actually a third one that's assumed, and that is that he's competent. Right? Hananiah is the governor of the castle. That means he knows what he's doing. Right? He's probably good at his job. I don't think Nehemiah would have appointed a guy who didn't know how to do it. So let's just assume that. People who are competent should be given the jobs that they're competent for. Let's put that to one side. That's fairly obvious. But there's these other qualities. God-fearing and faithful. God-fearing and faithful. Now, why am I talking about this? Well, partly because we're about to appoint an elder. We've multiplied into 4 locations as a church. We meet in 4 different places. Each place has elders. Some of them are guys that you know, some of the guys that you've not met even, because they're in different places. It's exciting. But you need to know we take time over this. We take a lot of time getting to know the guys that we ask to be elders. We really want to put the right qualified people in place. Because leadership is important. We could say, well, why do we need leaders? We don't need leaders. Aren't we God's family? We could just hold hands and sing songs and make our clothes out of hemp and everything's fine. And who needs leaders? Let's just all be flat, one level altogether. That's a lovely idea, but the reality is whenever you try and flatten things, you still end up with some people who make all the decisions. You say we don't have leaders. Trust me, you will have. You will have. Some people will just influence others. Some people by accident. There just will be. So the best thing for us to do is to appoint the people who most qualify. People who we say, okay, this is someone who God has given us as a leader. Someone who we say, oh, there's a clear calling of God upon this person. Not that they're the best Christian. This is not that we sort of say, well, you've achieved a certain mark on your Christian exam, so you're through. But we see God's particular grace, ability, gifting upon them. And character, God-fearing, faithful. It's very important that they fear God because leaders have to know what to fear, right? Leadership is a challenging responsibility. You know this from your job, right? Or from your family situation. Leadership requires courage, often. You have to know what things to fear. What things do I take seriously? What things do I keep away from? What things do I march towards? What do I fear? I sometimes get the hunch, watching the news and looking at the politicians, that the thing they fear the most is not getting voted in next time. The decisions that get made are made on the basis of, well, I want to carry on being a politician, basically. Why are you making that decision? Well, I'd like to still be in my job in 5 years, that's why. Some of you have been watching some of the documentaries about the outbreak of war 100 years ago. Isn't it a horrible thing to consider that perhaps the reason why the First World War began was because the cabinet, the government of that time, most of them did not actually want the war, the cabinet of that time. But they knew that the Tories did want the war. And so to stay in power, because there were some that did, some that didn't, they said, well, let's unite around those that do want the war, because we don't want to be forced out if an election comes and the country is in favour of the war. Now, that's one historian's reading of it, which I actually think, having looked at it, is pretty sound. What it tells me is how horrifying it is when leaders fear the wrong thing. They can plunge nations into war. Leaders must fear God. Leaders who fear God can be trusted. Because in the end, they know, God put me here, God can take me whenever he wants. It's up to him. I must put him first in my life. That's what we look for. We also look for faithfulness. It's in the verse. He was a faithful man. He was a loyal man. He was faithful to Nehemiah. He listened to Nehemiah. He wanted to follow Nehemiah's vision. We look for that in leaders. We're always thinking, does this guy want the same things? Is this guy after the same vision? Is he pushing forward on the same journey? And that's worth checking. It's worth testing that. We'll even put leaders through seasons of trial, checking out, are they following this? When you press them, when they come under pressure, what comes out? What passions come out? What are the things they long for? Are they faithful to the same vision that we're faithful to? Or have they got their own ideas? Are they here for their own gain? Or they have selfish ambition fueling them? Nehemiah looked for men who were God-fearing and faithful, and obviously competent. I want to tell you, that's true about Matt Carville. It's wonderfully true. We're appointing an elder. We want to celebrate that this week. Even significant that Matt is leaving the staff of the church at the same time as becoming an elder. He's been paid by the church for years, run the student work very faithfully, ran the evening service faithfully. Now he's becoming an elder while he's going out into teaching and education in the secular sphere. He feels like God's told him to do that. We feel happy to release him to do that, even though we're going to miss him from the staff. Well, that tells you the guy's not in it for the money. There isn't much money in being an elder, by the way, but just in case you're worried, the guy is giving himself to God and the church, whether he gets paid to or not. And we have several elders who are doing that. There's some in this room, guys who are elders, who serve faithfully, giving extra time to pastoring you guys, looking after the flock, shepherding the sheep well. And they don't get a penny for it. They serve with the time that they have left over. That's a huge gift to us, and Matt's doing that as a good example to many. So I wanted to throw that in as part of this message, just to kind of help us see how this book is relevant to our story. Let's move on to some final things. I've said I talk about how Nehemiah made good decisions about people. I want to also look at how he followed and understood God's plan. Okay, this is the second and last thing. He understood God's plan. He understood that God had a plan. That's come through as we've gone through this book. You may have noticed. You see, we live in a time, listen, this is so important. I wish all of Brighton could hear this. We live in a time where people have basically settled on the idea that history doesn't have a plan. That it really is basically an accident. There's no purpose. There's no goal. There's no end in sight, no end worth striving for. It's just extinction, because all we are is an accident. That's the world that you and I are living in. That sentiment, that belief prevails in the media, in the wider culture, in education. It's what we've been given to believe. This book says something quite different. This book says there is a plan. There is a purpose. There is an end in sight. It's a good end. It's a great end. God made the world with a plan in mind. That plan has been attacked forcefully through history, but God has declared he will still have his way. Nehemiah understood that. He deep in his gut, he knew God's plan will prevail. He just knew it. So when he hit the wall, when he hit deep challenges, you get to places like verse 14 of chapter 6. We touched on this last week, where he says, remember Tobiah and Sanballat, oh my God, according to these things that they did, and also the prophetess Noadiah and the rest of the prophets who wanted to make me afraid. His response to setback and challenge is to say, God, remember. Please remember this difficult season I'm going through. He would not say that. He wouldn't waste his breath if he didn't hold as a deep conviction the fact that God was in control of history, and God will see wrongs put right. God will see justice done. And God will have his way. He just knew it. He knew God's going to have a Jerusalem. He will have a great city. He promised it to his servant David. He promised a great city. He promised that he would rule over creation, over mankind from his city. He knew, I'm building God's wall. This isn't just my personal dream, my personal ambition, which might disappear within a few weeks. This is God's eternal dream, God's plan. And I'm tying my life up with God's greater plan. You see, you must have in your life a sense of purpose. You know that you can't do life without it. I've told you the story perhaps before of the prisoners of war. True story, that prisoners of war kept in a camp, and they were told by their imprisoner, go and move these rocks from this side of the camp to the other. Huge rocks, huge camp. Take them, that side of the camp to the other. This bunch of prisoners just daily, day after day, in the grinding work it was, in the baking heat of the sun, taking these huge rocks, one after another, putting them, not knowing why. And when they'd finished doing it, the commander said, very good, now take them all back. Day after day, they just kept it, just this monstrous kind of cycle of futility. What's it all for? What's it all for? And some of us, we're content to go through life not knowing why we're doing the things we're doing. We don't know why. Well, I want to have a career. I want to have a successful... Why? What's it for? Where's it going? What's it going to be in 1,000 years? Nothing. Less than 1,000 years. What's it all for? Where's it all going? What's the point of it? We carry on in our futility. You know, those prisoners, they started to kill themselves. Because truly, the human spirit can't bear looking futility in the face. We usually hide ourselves from it, don't we? We just say, no, my life isn't futile. So we entertain ourselves, we amuse ourselves, we keep ourselves distracted from the prevailing sense of meaninglessness. I want my life to mean something. Oh, it never will, so I'll just pretend it does. I'll just watch another movie. I'll just play another game. It won't do. It won't fill the hole. We need meaning. We need destiny. We need it to mean something. Nehemiah understood that it does mean something. There's a plan, there's a God, he has a purpose, a goal. He's building a city. I'm going to help him. I'm going to play my part in what he's building. So when he hits difficulty, he takes it to God. Say, God, remember, God, you're still in control. God, you still have a plan. God will see to it. God will establish his city. Just as Nehemiah sees it here in verse 16, it says, when our enemies heard that we'd finished the wall, all the nations around us were afraid and fell greatly in their own esteem. It seems to me what we have in this verse is a little down payment of what will one day happen cosmically, what will one day happen to the whole world. God will see to it that the nations that have despised him, the enemies that have resisted God, will one day be silenced. Sanballat, in all his rage and opposition, from this point on, we don't notice him. He doesn't come up in the book. He's finished. All his active abuse, all his accusations of Nehemiah, they're done. The wall's been built. The work is finished. It's done. The Bible says that there's going to come a day when God will do this on a cosmic level. There'll be a new Jerusalem, not made from the bricks and mortar of this book, made from people. There'll be a new city. There'll be a finished work. There'll be a new heavens and a new earth with Jesus the King, the Son of David, reigning over everything. And in that day, the enemies of God will be afraid and will fall greatly in their own esteem. I want to tell you, whatever you do, don't be one of God's enemies. Don't hold out against him. It's what we've been doing from the cradle, right? All of us. We need to get to the point of humbling ourselves now. I tell you, you will be humbled before God and his son, Jesus. You'll either be humbled now or you'll be humbled too late. Humble yourself now. Say, Jesus, I see that history is not about me and my plan, my purpose. I tell you, friends, you can try and build a purpose. Try and invent one. Create a meaning and a reason for life. It won't ultimately fill the gap. The gap's too big. It's God-shaped. I was stunned watching a couple of years ago a BBC video where they talked in the news about, they just interviewed a few of the gold medalists after the Olympics. Did you see this? A few of the gold medalists. It was stunning. Names that we would all know. Sitting, looking into the camera saying, now I've won my medal, I don't know what my life is about. Devastated. I don't know what to do. When you win, it's harder than when you lose. Because your whole life has been about this one thing, and what now? You think, surely a gold medalist is the peak of human achievement. That's why it's the Olympics, the thing. They get to the point thinking, what actually is it all for? What's it about? What do I need to fill this massive aching gap in my heart with? What's the purpose? What's the meaning? Nehemiah understood God has an eternal plan. And so even if I fail in the present, even if I blow it, even if I don't build the wall like I want it to be built, even if the opposition gets even harder, I can go to God. My life has meaning. God will turn things around. There's a purpose. He will establish his son, Jesus, on Zion, his holy hill. In the city of the eternal city of God will be built. There'll be a day. We know it from this book. We know it in our lives. We can be confident of it. And if we know it, it fills us with a tremendous relief to know that it all depends on God. It depends on God. It's God's business. God's building the city. God's building this church. You don't know how much of a freedom that is for me as a pastor. Jesus said, I will build my church. The gates of hell will not prevail. If I had any sense that I was responsible for CCK, I wouldn't sleep a wink. I get to sleep because I know Jesus is building his church. It's Jesus' business. Your life, the things that you want to achieve, you want to accomplish. You know what? If they're God's plans, if it's God's will for your life that you're pursuing, you can rest because it's his business. It's his problem. Pour it back on him. I'll strengthen my hand, I'll work hard, but I won't trust ultimately in myself, my resources. It's his great power that I rest in. We've got to keep learning more and more what it means to do that. But for some of you, that's the message of this for you today, and this I'll finish with. The message for some of you here today is that you've been chasing a kind of success that isn't even real. So when you find it, you'll find it's not real, if you find it. And you might even kill yourself trying to find it. You will exhaust yourself. For some of you, it's even spiritual, religious success. You've come to church here today saying, I've got to try hard to do God's will. I've got to try harder to be a good person, and maybe I'll be a Christian. I've got to try harder to be a good Christian, then maybe God will accept me and everything will be all right and the work will be done. There's work to be done. I've got to finish. He was preaching about building the wall and finishing and persevering. That's me. I've got to persevere. I've got to work harder. I've got to try harder this week. I'll try really hard this week. I'm sure that's how many of us in this room are feeling right now. I've got to try harder. It's not the way, friends. You'll exhaust yourself. You know, Jesus, John chapter 4, he says, my food is to do the will of him who sent me and finish his work. He's the greater Nehemiah. And it says on the cross, John chapter 19, verse 30. Jesus, from the cross, his last words, it is finished. It's finished. Some of you're trying so hard to finish the things that you really ought to preach so far as that, yeah, it's true, my inbox is rammed and my house is a mess and there are projects left undone. I think if only I could prove myself, if only I was a completer finisher, then I would be a success. You never will. You never will. Even Bill Gates never will. Jesus is the only one that did. He said, it's finished. The work I came to do is finished. Because he has done the work, you can rest in his grace. It's finished.